Hi, my name's Thete and we're going to be talking about Age of Sigmar again. This time I'm going to be having a little look at my analytical review of the units in the new Daughters of Khaine battletome. I've done several videos around the Head Knights of Slaanesh, and there's actually a sneaky little thing at the end of the video that I'll discuss as well, related to comments arising from that. But in terms of the Daughters of Khaine one, much less controversial, whereas people have looked at the Head Knights of Slaanesh and not been too sure about it, or in fact actually been dissatisfied with it, and I think unfairly, as I've demonstrated there. Daughters of Khaine has been received as, yeah, this is good. This is definitely an improvement. Now, what I'm going to do is do what I did with those other ones. Basically, I give a score to different units based on their power. In other words, their the damage they can deal out, their defensive abilities, how much damage they can withstand, and their ability to tear across the battlefield and smash into something, whether to deal damage or whether to just block it for a bit. And the lower the score, the better, because it's basically it's quite a simple system. The amount of damage that I'd expect something to do, again, something I base it on something with a 4-up save, so nice and beefy. The amount of damage I would expect it to do, you know, and I do the points value of the unit, the minimum size unit, divided by the damage it can do in the shooting phase, plus 2 lots of damage it can do in the combat phase. And the reason I do that is because in one battle round, you can only do 1 round of shooting, unless you've got command abilities that are sneaky. But you can have 2 rounds of combat, even for normal units. So, when we look at the power, and someone did suggest splitting up heroes and other units, so I've done that. That's easy enough and also fair enough, because heroes, of course, you expect to be more expensive anyway, because you have special abilities they can buff. Some units can buff other units, but generally speaking, heroes are there to buff other units and may have magical abilities or something like that. So in terms of units, the best bang for your buck is from the Khainite Shadow Stalkers. Now, I love these guys because 2 reasons. First of all, you get a decent number of them. It's not like a small Warcry warband. Well, there's going to be one of those in it anyway. You know, you get a decent number of them. They can deal a decent amount of damage if you get up and close and personal with something. But strategically, they're incredibly useful as well. So you can put them in your army. They're only 100 points for the 9 of them. They can deal a lot of damage for their points value. In fact, it's the most efficient way to deal damage for the points. But you've got that strategic ability to use them because they can teleport. Their movement, they just go bang. Obviously, like with any form of teleport, you've got to set them up, you know, 9 inches away from enemy units. But for objective capturing or threatening, so if your opponent, for example, has an objective and they've captured it, they want to move off from it. If you've got this unit and you hold this unit back, you're like daring them to do that. Oh, you move off it, I'll move onto it, son. Okay, so, and then if you don't need to use them strategically like that, they are actually an effective unit for dealing some damage as well. And 100 points, and yes, eventually you would lose. You would lose it. On the defensive side of things, they're actually not bad on the defense. In fact, they're the most efficient on the defensive side of it as well. I'd actually not clocked that just until, I don't know why. This is the unit to take all the time. Because in terms of, you know, how many effective wounds they've got, because where I've put wounds here is effective wounds. So that is based on taking rend 1, damage 1 attacks. What would you need? How much damage would your opponent need to do to actually finish the unit off? And it's effectively nearly 16 when you take into account saves and so on. So Khainite Shadow Stalkers are top of the tree there. In terms of the next one on power, unsurprisingly, would be Witch Elves. Witch Elves are mad. And this is, you know, without... I assume with Witch Elves, I think I assume with this one that they would have the hero close by. Although I'm not sure I did for this one, actually. I think for this particular value, I didn't do that, just to be sure, because not all Witch Elves might be fully within range. But you have got that ability as well, that Witch Elves can be buffed as well by other heroes, and it's very likely they would be. you would want to buff them with Witch Brew, which is not as easy now, but you would at some point get them buffed with Witch Brew. And for one of my lists, you'll get it done quite quickly. And you'll certainly want to keep it close to, say, a Cauldron of Blood at the very least for the Blood Shield. And they work very well together, but you won't always guarantee the wound bonus there. But they are very, very good value for their points. And, you know, blocks of Witch Elves are still going to be a very effective way of dealing damage. And they are also a very efficient way of taking damage as well. If you can get them, again, I mean, you could potentially give them Bladed Bucklers as well. You still get a lot of attacks in there. You could keep them by a Cauldron of Blood for the Blood Shield. And you could be looking at a 4-up save. You could potentially be looking at a 5-up Ignore as well with Hagnar. So, you know, Witch Elves are going to be amazing still. They were before, they're still going to be. In terms of power, the next most efficient one are Blood Sisters, but significantly less effective than Witch Elves, which is why I think Melusai armies are not really, I don't think they're not going to be as strong as Witch Elf armies. It's not even like you get any special bonuses from the various temples that are going to make jump Melusai ahead of Witch Elves, because that's not going to be the case. But after the Blood Sisters, and this is a real interesting one, is Avatar of Khaine. Now, when I did my initial response to the Daughters of Khaine battletome, I looked at the Avatar of Khaine and went, oh, this is interesting now, but I didn't think I would take it. I've completely changed my mind. Now, it's straight away with the new rules, incredibly useful if you're going to have a priestess heavy army, and I have come up with such a one, because particularly if you cluster the Avatar of Khaine around it, you just give them +1 to their you know, prayer roll. And the thing is, and I keep trying to look through this, and I don't know whether this will be FAQ'd or anything. I look at it and think, obviously, the way a prayer works is you cast it on a 3-up. That's just it for prayers. If you get a 2, you get nothing. If you get a 1, then you take a mortal wound. But it's not an unmodified 1 if you roll a 1. So with the Avatar of Khaine nearby, you can't roll a 1. If you roll a 1, it's actually a 2. So you make yourself immune to the mortal wounds. That's brilliant. That's absolutely astounding. And you could combine that, and I'm going to forget the name of the thing now. You could combine that with, and is it a relic that does this? I think it's a relic rather than a command trait, but I can't quite remember, where you can cast your extra prayer, but if you roll a 1, you take D3 mortal wounds. You're not going to roll a 1. So you could, I haven't in my list for that, but you could absolutely take that. Again, unless it's FAQ'd to be unmodified 1. But yeah, so that's absolutely brilliant, unless that's a mistake. And also the fact that the Avatar of Khaine is also efficient with the damage dealing now for its points means I'm just thinking you're going to take this. You are going to take it. The chances of it not being animated with the +1 to roll as well is really good. I mean, only rolling a 1, I mean, you wouldn't get the mortal wounds. If you rolled a 1 on the prayer to animate, then it wouldn't animate. That causes you problems because it's going to get left behind as you advance. So that would be a problem. But again, the chances of that are slim, and you could, of course, unless you're taking a specific temple, potentially take the, I think this is a command trait that allows you to re-roll a failed prayer anyway. That's what I've tended to do in the past. But for my initial priestess list, which will be Hagnar, that won't be the case. But you would have that option if you just wanted to protect yourself against that, because then you'd change it from a 1 in 6 chance from disaster to a 1 in 36 chance. So yeah, Avatars of Khaine, I think now I'm looking at them going, yeah. Doomfire Warlocks also. I have Doomfire Warlocks and I've used them, but I've used them as fun. I thought they were fun. Not that great, not fantastic, but you know, you'd play in the club. I've never taken Daughters of Khaine to a tournament. I've only played one Age of Sigmar tournament because, you know, since returning to the hobby, I haven't been able to do anything for the last year. But I wouldn't take them to a tournament. I'd absolutely take them to a gaming club because I found them fun. Now I'm looking at them and thinking, I'm still probably saying that a tournament list I might not, but they're better now. They are more competitive. And also the fact that to have 10 of them with the intention of taking a unit of 10, because then you used to get +1 to your casting and dispelling. And their spell, you know, the Doomfire spell is decent, but you don't want to be failing it. So the +1 to cast there, but all your opponent had to do was to kill 1 in the unit, and you straight away, you've lost that. Well, now you get the casting and unbinding bonus for having 5 models in the unit. So the unit's cheaper. You only need 5 to get the bonus. You could take 2 units of 5 and you know, your opponent, if they kill some in one unit and they don't in the other, well, it's the other unit that's going to be casting your higher value spells. Simple as that. Because you can only cast Doomfire with 1 of them anyway. It's not like those sneaky, I can't remember the Stormcast ones that are allowed to just cast it. Evocators, I think they can cast it as often as they like, no matter how many units you've got. So Doomfire Warlocks also look decent, but in terms of the power rating there, they are also starting to middle in terms of effectiveness. So in terms of effectiveness for their points, just in terms of their combat stats, not brilliant, but when you add in the fact that they're a caster, that improves their value. And of course, they don't just have to cast Doomfire, they could cast something more useful as well. So they are a much more interesting take. After that, much less effective. So Khinnerai Life Takers, potentially useful, not brilliant. They're strategically useful, same as Heartrenders. And the Heartrenders are arguably more so because they can try and stand a little bit away from something and plink shots off. But in terms of the damage you're going to get out for them, it's not great, so you certainly wouldn't charge them straight into something. They're there to nosy around and keep your opponent honest. A bit like with the Shadow Stalkers, the Khainite Shadow Stalkers, keep your opponent honest when it comes to abandoning objectives, thinking, oh, I've captured it, I'll move off it now. Will you? Will you do that? Because otherwise I'll just take it with my harpies. But I'd prefer to do that with the Shadow Stalkers, so I'm turned off a little bit the Khinnerai. But they could see use. Sisters of Slaughter now, I mean, the main benefit of them remains the main benefit that they can pile in from 6 inches away. That makes them useful. And they've got, you know, the rangers on their whips is significant as well, so you can get, you know, more of them attacking in. But now that they are more expensive than Witch Elves, they are significantly more expensive than Witch Elves, and they are not always as useful as Witch Elves. They won't do as much damage generally. It's just that benefit of being able to pile in from 6 inches. The fact that your opponent, you know, when they're trying to keep away from certain units, they go, oh, I'll make sure I'm more than 3 inches away from that so they can't pile in when you charge into a different unit. Can't really do that with Sisters of Slaughter. They're an ever-present threat, and it's you know, if they stay near a unit that you want to charge, your opponent wants to charge, they're not realistically going to be able to do that without inviting the Sisters of Slaughter to come slamming in. That's their main benefit. Is it now worth it? No. I'd rather take another unit of 30 Witch Elves, have the possibility that they'll be able to, you know, stay out of combat range of them, and have another 60 points for something else. That's what I would rather. Bloodstalkers actually are okay, even though they're low down there. They are a ranged unit. In my system, ranged units, because it's based on sort of absolute damage that you can deal over a battle round, they tend to fare quite poorly. But as ranged units go, the Bloodstalkers are not bad at all. And I'll come to that at the end of the video with the supplemental bit, comparing them with a few other ranged units just to show that. So they're actually decent for their points value as ranged units go. As a unit that you can stand back, and 24-inch range is very good on their bows. You can stand back, holding an objective. They're not weak. You know, they can stand up to a little bit of punishment. You know, if you hang them back, of course, they're not going to be near a cauldron for blood shield or anything like that, but they can take a little bit of punishment. They're not going to be easy to shift if some small commando unit tries to nick that objective, but you can still do damage. You don't have to sit on it and have a picnic. In terms of the heroes, the absolute best power for points is Morgweth, the Beastgrave Warbrand, or the Underworlds of some kind. I can't remember which one it is. I mean, everyone's noted this, haven't they? It's just too cheap. That's too cheap. You know, it does everything a hag queen does. It is a hag queen, albeit it's a hag queen that you can't make the generals. You can't, well, you can make them general, but you wouldn't. You can't give it a command trait. You can't give it a relic. But do you know what? It's a hag queen that has a posse that can not only deal damage, hence why, you know, in terms of characters, it wins on the damage per points, but also it's effectively giving that hag queen more wounds. And it's no surprise she's at the top of the defensive league as well, although I'll have to come to a little point about Morathi on that. You would always take this. I have done a Melusai themed list which doesn't include her because it's a Melusai themed list. And I specifically only took Melusai. Only for theme would you not take this unit. So straight away, if you design a unit, if I was thinking of designing a unit, even for a gaming club, but you still wanted it to be decent, you don't necessarily have to be ultra competitive, but decent. Straight away, Morgweth, the Underworlds unit, and Khainite Shadowstalkers, the Warcry unit. Straight away, without even thinking about what sort of force I want to build, they're in. They're just in. The Bloodrack Shrine and, sorry, where we've got Slaughter Queen on Cauldron of Blood is, aside from that, in terms of the ones that can do a bit of damage, a decent bit of damage, even if it costs a bit more, that's really good value. Bloodrack Shrine is very similar value as well. Hag Queen on Cauldron is, of course, a little bit below it because they don't have the Death Sword, but other than that, it's the same thing. So that's also quite decent. Then you go down to a Bloodrack Medusa, not bad, especially as it's a wizard. Because it's a wizard, that makes it more suitable. The Bloodrack Shrine as well. And the Cauldrons of Blood, I mean, they're all very good value for points in themselves. You know, there are just pure combat heroes in some other armies that don't have scores as low as this. They're not as good as this. And yet they also bring powerful buffs. You know, whether it be magic or whether it be prayers or the likes of the Blood Shield, something like that. And then we've got the Shadow Queen. Now, I mean, she's just a threat. She's a massive threat. You would argue it's not the best use of your points in terms of pure damage output, but she has a distractive effect. And if I go on to like talk about the defensive side of it, so she scores very poorly on defense because if you look at, you know, she's got 18 effective wounds is the way you work it out. But in reality, it's more than 18 effective wounds. So really her defense score should be a lot better because of course she's limited to taking 3 per turn. Can't really come up with a value for that, and it's really not worth my time. I will just know that her position in this table should actually just be removed because she's a freak. You know, she is stunningly well defended. It's just that because you can't heal her, and because, you know, she's only going to have her basic save, you can't boost it at all. She is going to, you know, have 18 wounds effectively. She can't negate those wounds. You don't even get your 6 up. Ignore. But at the same time, if someone in a particular turn, you know, does 20 damage to her, this says that under normal circumstances, you'd need to do 18 to kill her. If you do 20, you're just going to do 3. So she's definitely lasting 2 full battle rounds at least. So she's a threat. And it's one of those things your opponent will look at and think, I cannot afford to spend too many attacks on her. So, you know, but you also want to do some. You can't just look at her and go, well, I'm limited to 3 wounds per turn, so I'll just ignore her and focus on something else, because then you're just leaving her alive for the whole battle. You can't afford to leave her alive for the whole battle. So although she doesn't score as highly as many of the others, and I have done the Shadow Queen and the Morathi Khaine slightly separately, but if I combined them, you would see that she'd finish even lower. Even there, and I've based it on the individual points for the Shadow Queen and Morathi Khaine, even then, it's not brilliant, but again, it's not bad when you consider some other... But if you consider pure combat heroes in other armies, she wouldn't look that brilliant. So she's not that brilliant for her points in terms of the damage, but she's fast, and she is very defensible, and that's really what you're paying the points for. And of course, part of her little twin, is a significant magic caster. And also, if you target Morathi Khaine, well, -1 to hit. So you'd ideally like to, if you've got a choice, you would target the Shadow Queen anyway, because you're more likely to cause the damage then. And then in terms of other ones down there, so the Slaughter Queen is not amazing on their own. They're not that amazing for their points. I wouldn't take one. If you're going to take a Slaughter Queen, I would put it on a Cauldron of Blood. But to my mind, the Witch Brew is so useful. I mean, a Slaughter Queen on a Cauldron of Blood, I suppose a Cauldron of Blood in a Melusai army, maybe you go for that. If you've not got any Witch Elves anyway, you know, and that's a good use of your points. In a Witch Elves based army, I'm just thinking not the Slaughter Queen at all. And the Melusai Iron Scale's just disappointing. It can buff. I'm not saying you wouldn't take it at all, because the buffs could be significant, could be worth it just for that. On its own, if you weren't using those buffs effectively, you lose a lot with the Melusai. So the Melusai has to be used beyond just their combat abilities. You wouldn't just stand those back, plinking arrows off. So that's it in terms of power. I mean, I've discussed in terms of defensive some of the others. You know, the Cauldrons and the Bloodrack Shrine and Morgweth herself are all very good value in terms of heroes for their defensive, you know, what's their defense. Morathi, of course, is. I just can't quantify that. It would take... You'd have to come up with some value of a reasonable number of wounds that an opponent would want to throw her way. It doesn't seem to be a useful endeavour, that coming up with that, because it would just be arbitrary. So we just state that she is defensively impressive. In terms of speed, again, you know, I've mixed these up because largely it's a bit weird the way I do this anyway. Partly because this is based on charge ranges, I could just give them a charge, you know, just put the charge range down. So the likes of Kinnerai, Life Takers and Heartrenders, arguably, I mean, most of the time when they charge, they'd probably want to charge on a 9 because you'll have just plonked them down. But in theory, you know, they've got a 14-inch movement, so that gives them an average charge range of about 21. Witch Elves about 17 because, you know, you can run and charge. And also bearing in mind the battle rounds, you'd be able to re-roll 1s on the run, so that boosts them up a little bit more as well. So they're pretty decent. Beyond that, I mean, Sisters of Slaughter, similar sort of thing there. But for their points just don't look as effective in terms of something. Again, I use this score, it's the least prioritised, but I use this score imagining that I just need a speed bump. I just need to slow my opponent down. I want to fire something off at that unit. I don't want it running around causing trouble, so I just want to charge something into it. And for that, Witch Elves would be really good. 300 points for 30. They are very efficient in terms of the damage they'll kick out. So they're not just going to stand there and take it. They will dish out a load of damage. They can take damage, particularly if they're near a Cauldron of Blood for the Blood Shield. And they can move fairly quickly as well. For infantry, it's very impressive, their charge range. So that's the sort of look in terms of how I'm valuing the units. Now, before I go on to the supplemental, I'll just go over a couple of lists that I quickly knocked up. The ones that... I'll do the Melusai one first because, I mean, a Melusai army, I suppose, is relatively straightforward to come up with. I've not gone for battalions with either of these, I don't think. But for my Melusai, of course, I've taken Morathi. I was a bit sneaky here. I did take Morgweth the Blooded, I realised. I obviously just couldn't bring myself not to. Shouldn't really have done that. But I did. Then the Bloodrack Shrine for General. Obviously, you're going to take a Bloodrack Shrine as your General or a Bloodrack Medusa so that you can then access a Melusai army. Otherwise, you can't. So then your Melusai are battle line. Not just Blood Sisters this time, Blood Stalkers are as well. So I've gone for 3 units of 10 Blood Sisters. Now, in previously, when I was planning, although I hadn't played a Melusai army, but when the Morathi Broken Realms book came out and I was planning one, not being able to play it, I was going to take 30 Blood Sisters, but as a unit of 20 and 2 units of 5. Because Blood Sisters were the battle lines, so I needed 3 units of them, but you also got the break point for having the massive unit, which no longer exists. So there's no value now in taking a unit of 20 of them. I don't save any points, so I take 3 units of 10. And 2 units of 5 Blood Stalkers. And those are my units. That's technically 5 battle line units. And then I've also taken the endless spells, the Bloodrack Viper and Blade Wind. And I've taken the Temple Celebron. So, -1 to be hit with shooting, which would be really useful because quite a lot of that army, I don't have a lot of shooting myself, so I need to advance it forward. It gives me a bit of protection there. Also, it will mean that my Bloodrack Shrine will also be -1 to be hit in melee as well, giving more survivability there. In a unit like this, although I've given Morgweth Crimson Rejuvenation to potentially try and heal the Bloodrack Shrine, keep them close by, and she's still useful, even though as a Hag Queen, there's no Witch Elves about, that reduces her usefulness. For 80 points, she's still useful even without that, even without Witch Brew. Even without the prayer, she's still useful for a point. That's how low the points are. If she couldn't cast prayers and she didn't have Witch Brew, she's still worth taking. But she does have prayer, and I would take Crimson Rejuvenation there. In terms of spells, the Bloodrack Shrine, I've taken the Withering, so debuff enemy unit. And I mean, with Celebron, she has to take the standard relic and command trait. The command trait is the one that gives her -1 to be hit in melee. And I think the relic is the one that buffs one of her weapons in combat. And Marathi, I've given Mind Razor. You still take Mind Razor. Arguably it's even more useful now. So that's the Melusai list that I would take, which I will try. I don't consider this to be brilliant, but you know, for a gaming club, friendly game, I think it would be decent. I think it would be okay. As a Melusai army goes, you know, and like I say, I haven't put a battalion in. Viperic Guard, I might have almost thought about it, but no. I've decided not. I almost decided on doing it, and rather than having lots of little units, having several larger units to really reduce, because then you can get the benefit of the battle battalion of reduced number of drops. But I'm not that bothered about reduced number of drops, if I'm honest, in a gaming club scenario. Then the one that is my actual list, first of all, which is a Hagnar list, and it's going to be very much a Witch Elves list. And I've gone for the general Hag Queen on Cauldron of Blood. Because Hagnar, command trait Devoted Disciples, and the artifact the Fury. I mean, that just has to be taken there. But that's really useful defensively. I mean, Witch Elves, again, I've already said for their points, are not bad defensively on their own. But, you know, if you buff their defences, that's amazing. Absolutely amazing. I'll come on to something else as well at the end here. So, Hag Queen on Cauldron of Blood General with both the relic and the command trait. The Prayer Crimson Rejuvenation, again, healing, always useful. Another Hag Queen on Cauldron of Blood. And I've given them the Prayer Blessing of Khaine. And Morgweth, I've given Sacrament of Blood. So Sacrament of Blood, I think, is one of those. I always get them mixed up now. But one of those prayers is the one that lets you advance the battle round. So, Hagnar, you count the battle round as one higher than it already is. Get this prayer off, and you count it another one. It is cumulative. So in battle round 1, it's actually battle round 3 for you. That adds +2 to your Witch Brew rolls. Okay? So Witch Brew, the way that works is now to put the effects on a nearby unit of Witch Elves. And you'll notice I've got 3 Hag Queens here. So I can put, and I've got 3 units of Witch Elves. I'll come to those. So I can put it on all 3. But to apply it, you have to roll a 5 up. Oh, that's a bit crap. But when battle round 2 is in play, you get to add +1 to it. And battle round 3, you get to add +2. Because I'll be counting it as battle round 3, I get to add +2. So that becomes a 3 up. And then in battle round 2, it'll be 2 up. Okay? So, yeah, the Witch Brew is back. The Witch Brew is happening. Okay, on average, one of them won't in the first battle round. That's okay. They may not get into combat in the first battle round. Then, of course, Morgweth the Blooded. I mean, if I took it in a Melusai army, I really shouldn't have done. I'm definitely taking it in this one. And then I've taken a Bloodrack Medusa, you know, for some magic, for Mind Razor, you know. Not that that's going to be my only caster, because I'll go through the battle line first. So 3 units of 30 Witch Elves. 2 of them with pairs of Sacrificial Knives, one of them with sacrificial knives and blade bucklers. Again, just a bit of, I mean, for a start, that's what I'll have anyway, but just a bit of flexibility in terms of if I see I might need a bit more defensibility in terms of a strong close combat unit that I intend to get in combat with. The advantage of the bladed bucklers, remember, is not just an extra save against melee attacks, but you know, even if you in theory got no save, the rend was huge and you got no save, you would still roll your save anyway, because an unmodified 6 on your save does a mortal wound back. It's a bit like Plague Monks, isn't it? You know, your opponent could go, I'm going to reap you like corn. And it's like, yeah, but you've taken a load of mortal wounds. I remember doing that to Scargrath once. Corn player wasn't happy with me. With the Plague Monks. Killed a load of my Plague Monks. I was just grinning. Because then he killed himself with mortal wounds. Oh dear. Not from scratch. I'm not saying it didn't. He'd already been wounded from other things. So 3 units of 30 Witch Elves there. I've also gone for 2 units of 5 Doomfire Warlocks. Because, like I said, now you've got 2. So now I've got 3 casters in the army. 3 casters. 2 of whom, until they've been diminished, until I've lost a model from the unit, a +1 to cast and dispel as well, or unbind rather. So that's decent as well. I've given, you know, in terms of the Blood Medusa, Mind Razor. In terms of Doomfire Warlocks, 1 unit I've given the Withering, 1 unit Shroud of Despair. So debuffing there. And then for the final 2 units, so Khainite Shadow Stalkers, again, I'm just going to say, unless it's a particularly themed army, they're a must-have. I just think they're a must-have. And then finally, the Avatar of Khaine. I've got 3 Witch Elves, Hag Queens. I'm taking an Avatar of Khaine. Absolutely. Now, because I've made it Hagnar, I don't get the ability to re-roll prayers on my general, which if I wasn't taking a temple, I would. Or in the old days, if I was going Hagnar, I would, because I didn't get a command trait for that, did I? I think that was right. So I could choose, or somehow I could choose that. Could I? I can't remember whether you got a relic or a command trait now. Actually, I think it might have been a command trait. Either way, I'm certainly not doing it now. But it might be interesting at some... If it's particularly risky, I might almost think of it. But again, it's not a major problem, is it? No, I don't worry about that. Hagnar is worth it. For a unit, for an army like this, with all these Witch Elves, Hagnar is absolutely worth it. Definitely worth taking. You know, if you're going to base an army around 3 units of Witch Elves and trying to get them Witch Brew, Hagnar. So that's my real list. Now, supplemental. So that's it for the Daughters of Khaine. This next bit is really in answer to some questions that people brought up regarding... I had an unusual one. I mean, every time I've done one of my videos on how I've sort of tried to mathematically model effectiveness of units, and they're always going to have drawbacks to it. There's no perfect system, otherwise Games Workshop would use it and nothing would be over or under pointed. But every time someone's put a comment in on what about this, I've addressed it in the following video. Now, in this one, I'm not going to do a separate video just for this, but I will point out, so with the Bloodstalkers, I talked about them having a points value of about 18, remember the lower the better. I've done this for some other ranged units in other armies. So, for example, Blissbarb Seekers from the Head Knights of Slaanesh, a value of 21.2. So just in terms of power, obviously Blissbarb Seekers, you know, can withstand more damage and they're much faster. So they have that going for them. They're definitely really worth it. And I would say better value than Bloodstalkers overall. But in terms of the damage they kick out, not so good. You know, some of them are really awful. I mean, the Arcanaut Ironclad is pretty bad, but that's because you're not just taking it for damage. It can do quite a lot of damage. It also costs a lot of points. You take it because you can teleport your whole bloody army around. But, you know, something like Auric Hearthguard with their magma pipes, not brilliant. Kurnoth Hunters with great bows, really bad. Value for points, terrible, terrible. You know, so something like that, where you might think, let's stick this on an objective and just plink off arrows. It's not worth it. Because, you know, the benefit comes with the fact that they're more defensible maybe, but in fact, you know, even in terms of their defense score, I mean, it's not bad. It's not bad at all. But then your opponent may just stay away. And is it worth the points just to have an objective that your opponent, where they concentrate on other objectives? Maybe, maybe not. But it's certainly not worth the points in terms of the damage they will do. But the particular question someone asked was about Sentinels, Lumineth Realm Lord Sentinels, the archers. And they were saying, well, they didn't actually specify which unit they were comparing it with. So I will assume they meant Blissbarb archers, because that's the most comparable. And they were saying, oh, they're not as good. You know, the Lumineth Realm Lord Sentinels are way better than the Blissbarb archers. They didn't say Blissbarb archers, they said Head Knights of Slaanesh shooters, and I assume they meant that. Not actually true. So if we look, first of all, Lumineth Realm Lord Sentinels, the best value is using the aimed bow, of course, but that depends on range. If you're out of 18 inches, you'll use your lofted bow, but if you can, you'll use your aimed bow. And that has a power value of 19.4. Blissbarb archers, 19.2. And the Blissbarb archers, actually no, have I got that right? Yeah, they're just better, just on that own. Now then what you say is, but Lumineth Realm Lords are casters, that adds value. Absolutely does, absolutely. So then what I said is, right, now how do you point in the casting? Well, you can't really, unless they cast Power of Hysh, the spell they get. So we'll do that. We'll cast Power of Hysh. It's cast on a 6. I have to take into account they have to cast it. I'm not automatically casting it for them. They might fail the cast. So I factored in the probability of them casting it, but I didn't factor in a chance of unbinding it. So there's no attempt to unbind. We'll assume they're far enough away from any caster who might wish to unbind it, or they might just not want to unbind it. Although they probably would, because if you've got Teclis about, you're not unbinding his stuff, are you? So you might as well try and unbind a Sentinel. But I'll assume no attempt at unbinding. And you look at the points value there, with them casting Power of Hysh on themselves for the, getting mortal wounds on 5s or 6s to hit with the Sun Metal weapons. And that comes out at a value on the aimed bow of 18.9. That is now slightly better than Blissbarb archers. But I'll say a couple of things about that. First of all, it's slightly different. People are really wringing their hands saying how overpointed all the Head Knights of Slaanesh are. And they are not. They're actually very good value. All of the mortal units are good value by the average value of units. The second thing to point out is you shouldn't always just directly compare one unit in one army with another, because sometimes you'll get certain abilities. A particular type of unit can be more useful to one type of army than another, for example. But we won't worry about that. They are very comparable. I think Sentinels and Blissbarb archers are very comparable. They're infantry-based shooters. So you have slight increase there. But then here's the other thing. And then you'll add into there, but they also get their Aether Quartz. Well, they do. And for one turn, that could add a bit there. But again, if you factored that in, even if we ignore the fact that there's a potential penalty for that, potential penalty, because your Cathalar might do something useful there, it doesn't change the points values that much. But here's where people are again forgetting the value of Head Knights of Slaanesh. So you build up a 2,000 points army of Head Knights of Slaanesh, or whatever it happens to be. And then you've got your 2,000 points of Lumineth Realm Lords. Now, in terms of effectiveness, if we were to work it all out for everything, you might just find that the Lumineth Realm Lords value is slightly better than the Head Knights of Slaanesh one. But the Head Knights of Slaanesh haven't just got 2,000 points, have they? Because they're going to summon some units in at some point. Because you're going to be plinking arrows at them. Oh, I've taken a wound. Right, that'll be a depravity point in the battle shock phase. And people need to consider that as well. And that's the same with any army that summons units in. You always have to consider that. And when you consider that, again, there's no way you can argue that, say, Blissbarb archers or even the Blissbarb seekers are not worth their points, even compared to something pretty good like the Lumineth Realm Lord Sentinels. But there's your supplemental. That's the Daughters of Khaine with an extra supplemental on it. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Until next time, I'll see you later.